The storm came in from the northwest 3 hours before anyone died. It moved like something with intent, a wall of white that swallowed the ridgeline first, then the tree line, then the valley below, until the entire operational theater was reduced to a gray-white erasure. Corporal Dennis Hargrove, 22 years old and in his first real winter deployment, stood at the edge of the mobile command post and watched the mountains disappear. He had grown up in South Carolina. He had never seen snow like this. He had never seen snow that made sound a low, continuous hiss against the metal panels of the armored vehicles, like something breathing. Temperatures dropped 6 degrees in 40 minutes, said the meteorologist, a thin woman named Lieutenant Sharon Eves who had been awake for 26 hours and looked it. She pressed 2 fingers to her tablet, dragging a weather chart across the screen. Wind cycling. No pattern. It's going to stay that way. Colonel Marcus Dunn did not look up from the topographic display. He was 51 years old, built like furniture, with a face that had been weathered into something close to stone. He had commanded 3 mountain operations in his career and understood in the particular way that only soldiers who have been cold for too long understand that weather was not a backdrop to combat. Weather was a combatant. And tonight, it was winning. "Give me the status on the targets," he said. The operations sergeant, a veteran named Raymond Kowalski, stepped forward. 19 attempts over 3 hours and 4 minutes. Best distance, 40, 3 meters short. Most consistent pattern. Left deviation, varying between 8 and 11 inches, depending on wind phase. He paused. "They're not missing because they're bad, Colonel. The math is wrong out there. Every calculation breaks down before the round gets halfway." The math was wrong. Dunn had been told this 11 separate times in the past 2 hours. It did not help him feel better about the 41 civilians being held inside Research Station Whitmore, a prefabricated military outpost built into the eastern face of the Kenai Ridgeline in Alaska. It had been a research station once low-temperature equipment testing, atmospheric data collection. It had been converted into a hostage location at approximately 0300 that morning when a 12-man insurgent unit with sophisticated equipment and clear operational planning had arrived, killed the 2-man security detail, and locked down the facility before any distress signal could be sent. The man holding the station, the man who had organized this, who was now visible at intervals through the reinforced observation windows, was a figure known in intelligence files as Conrad Braxton, former special operations, former private contractor, currently listed as deceased by 3 separate government agencies. He was not deceased. He was 4,231 meters away, moving between 3 window positions in a pattern irregular enough to defeat any targeting algorithm, carrying a military radio that was feeding a live broadcast to an undisclosed international channel. He had given them until 0200 to comply with demands that could not be complied with. It was 2,245. The 19 snipers who had already attempted the shot were the best available in a 600-kilometer radius. 2 were record holders. 1 had 17 confirmed long-range kills in 4 different operational theaters. They had all failed, not through incompetence. The science was genuinely hostile. The air temperature at that altitude created a density differential that bent trajectories in ways the standard ballistic software had not been calibrated to handle. The wind off the glacier moved in cycles that had no consistent interval. The snow itself, fine-grained and reflective, scattered the laser rangefinders and muddied the thermal optics. Every shot had been the best shot that physics would permit. Physics had said no. "We have the ground assault option," said Major Terrence Whitfield, who commanded the quick reaction platoon. He was a serious man with a serious proposal, and the decency to look uncomfortable about it. "If we move at 2,341 people inside," Dunn said. "Yes, sir. Braxton has the room mined. We saw it on the drone footage before we lost signal." "Yes, sir." Dunn turned away from the display and walked to the opening of the command tent, looking out at the white wall of storm. The nearest armored vehicle was barely visible, 40 meters away, a shadow inside the snow. He could hear the radios cycling through static. He could hear the wind finding every gap in the tent structure and working at it with surgical patience. "Is there anyone we haven't tried?" he asked. Silence. Then Kowalski said, very carefully, "There's the woman, sir." Dunn turned around. "What woman?" Her name was Helen Dray. She was sitting in the back of a support vehicle, not a combat vehicle, but a logistics truck that had come up with fuel and rations 3 hours earlier, wrapped in a field jacket that was at least 15 years old, drinking coffee from a metal cup and looking at nothing in particular. She was 44. She had a narrow, angular face that had been burned by wind and cold so many times it no longer looked like it could be burned further. Her hair was dark with gray at the temples, pulled back with no attention paid to it. She wore no rank. She wore no unit insignia. She had arrived with no explanation and no authorization that anyone could immediately trace. The driver of the logistics truck, a young private named Foster, had told Kowalski she'd been at the fuel depot outside Fairbanks, and had asked very quietly, with the particular quality of someone who does not ask things twice, if the truck was heading north. Foster had said yes. She had climbed in. She had not introduced herself. Hargrove, the corporal from South Carolina, was the one who had recognized her. He had seen a photograph once, in a publication about long-range marksmanship, that his instructor had shown his unit as an example of the discipline's outer limits. The photograph was 12 years old. The woman in it was younger, but the face was the same. "That's Helen Dray," he had told the sergeant next to him. The sergeant had looked at the woman in the logistics truck and looked back at Hargrove with the expression of a man managing his patience. "Helen Dray is a story," the sergeant had said. But Hargrove had gone to Kowalski anyway. And Kowalski, who was 60 years old and had been in the army long enough to believe in strange things, had remembered the name. Now Dunn walked to the logistics truck and stood outside it in the snow. Helen Dray looked at him with eyes the color of weathered wood. "You were at Voss Ridge," he said, "among other places. The record there was never officially confirmed." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't. You've been out of active service for 7 years. 6.5. Dunn looked at her for a long moment. The snow moved between them. A gust hit the side of the truck and the metal flexed with a low boom. "We have 19 shooters who have all failed," he said. "I know. I've been listening to the attempts. The distance is 4,200 meters. The conditions are, I know what the conditions are." She set the cup down on the seat beside her. "I've been sitting in this truck for 2 hours, Colonel. I've been reading the wind. From inside a truck, sound travels differently when it's carrying ice crystals. Temperature affects metal resonance. The truck panels have been telling me the wind pattern since I arrived." She said it without emphasis, without the tone of someone making a claim they needed to defend. "It's not consistent, but it's not random either. It cycles in a broken pattern, 11 minutes dominant northwest, then a variable cross period of between 90 seconds and 4 minutes, then northwest again. The cross period is when the shot is possible." Dunn stared at her. Behind him, he heard one of the snipers, Sergeant First Class Wade Penner, a man with 17 confirmed kills and a reputation that preceded him into rooms, make a sound in the back of his throat that was not quite a laugh. "The woman in the supply truck," Penner said, to no one in particular, "has been reading the wind with her ears." Helen Dray did not look at Penner. She looked at Dunn. "You don't have to believe me," she said. "You just have to run out of better options. Given your timeline, I'd estimate you have about 40 minutes before you're there." Dunn looked at the ground. He looked at the mountains invisible behind the white wall. He looked back at her. "You're not even in uniform," he said. "No." He breathed out. The breath hung between them in the cold air. "What do you need?" She picked up the coffee cup again. 15 minutes of quiet. Tell everyone to stop firing. I need to hear what's out there without interference." She paused. "And I need someone to move the floodlights. They're creating a thermal column that's distorting the air mass between here and the target." Dunn turned and issued the orders before the logic had fully finished assembling itself in his head. The floodlights went dark. The firing stopped. In the silence that followed, a silence so complete that the distant hiss of the storm felt like a sound inserted into nothing, Helen Dray climbed out of the logistics truck and walked to the forward observation position. She moved with a deliberateness that was not slowness, each step placed with awareness. She looked at the ground before she walked on it. She looked at the snow patterns around the fixed equipment. She stood still in the dark for 3 full minutes before she unslung the rifle. It was not a standard issue weapon. It was old, a custom precision rifle that had been built for someone by someone who had taken years to learn how to build it. The wood stock was worn smooth in specific places that mapped exactly to the grip pattern of a particular shooter over a particular number of years. It looked like an antique. Penner, watching from 10 meters back, had the expression of a man at an auction watching someone bid on something they didn't understand. "She's running no electronics," murmured Specialist Carla Denton, one of the spotter team. "No ballistic computer. No digital rangefinder. I don't even see a modern optic." She was correct. The scope on Helen Dray's rifle was a fixed-power optical instrument, handmade, with no battery, no display, No digital anything. It was glass and metal and mathematics built into curved surfaces decades ago. The junior soldiers watched her set up and did not know how to categorize what they were seeing. It was not the efficient, modern choreography of a trained unit. It was something older. She lowered herself to the ground without hurry and without drama and became part of the landscape in a way that was difficult to explain. The geometry of her posture was somehow consistent with the angle of the rocks and the lie of the snow in a way that made her hard to locate even when you knew where she was. She had told Hargrove, who had been assigned as her informal liaison because no one else wanted to stand near her, a single thing about what she was doing. She had said, "The 19 shooters before me were all solving a math problem. I'm not trying to solve it. I'm trying to dissolve it." He had not understood. He had written it down anyway. What she was doing, in practical terms, was this. She was reading a system. The wind off the Kenai Glacier at this altitude and temperature did not behave the way the meteorological models predicted, because the models were built on data from other places, other seasons. But the wind was not random. It was a machine with a broken rhythm. She had been listening to it for 2 hours. She had mapped its cycle the way a person maps a stranger's breathing when they share a room in the dark, not by measuring, but by attending. The 19 shooters had used technology to approximate the conditions and had failed because the approximations were wrong. The conditions were too specific, too local, too real. You could not approximate this wind. You had to know it. At some point during her silence, Penner had stopped making expressions and simply watched. She turned her head, just slightly, toward Hargrove. "Braxton will move to the northeast window in 7 minutes, she said. "He always returns to that window. It's the one with the best sight line to the valley. He can't help it. He's a trained observer, and that window gives him the most information. He'll stand there for approximately 40 seconds. She paused. "The wind will enter its cross phase 22 seconds into that window." Hargrove relayed this on the radio. Kowalski, at the command post, looked at Dunn. Dunn said nothing for a moment. "How does she know when he'll move to that window?" Kowalski asked. "I don't know," Hargrove said into the radio. In the silence, Helen Dray's voice came back, very quiet. "Because I would." 0001 hours, 59 minutes to deadline. Inside Station Whitmore, the 41 hostages had been moved to the central room, a large open space that had once held cold weather testing equipment, and now held frightened people sitting on a concrete floor. Among them, 7 military researchers, 12 civilian scientists, 11 support staff, 8 soldiers, who had been disarmed in the first minutes of the takeover, and 3 who had been injured resisting it. The live broadcast that Braxton was running showed his face at intervals calm, precise, the face of a man executing a plan he had prepared in detail. He did not appear to be afraid. He appeared, in fact, to be interested. He had built this situation the way an engineer builds a structure, to test its tolerances under load. At the command post, Dunn was looking at the broadcast on a tablet, sound off, and thinking about the 41 people and the 59 minutes, and the woman lying in the snow 400 meters north of him, who had told him with a quietness that was more convincing than certainty that she would make the shot. Major Whitfield was at his shoulder, reviewing the assault plan again. If they moved at 0045, they might reach the outer perimeter by 0115. The mines would kill some of the first team. The second team might reach the inner room before Braxton could execute the hostages. The mathematics of the assault plan were known. They were bad. The mathematics of the shot were unknown, which made them different. Dunn had been in enough situations to understand the difference between a calculated risk and a surrender to hope. He was not sure which category this fell into. He was leaning toward the radio to issue the assault-ready order when Hargrove's voice came through. "She's going still, sir. She says the window cycle is starting. 0003 hours, 57 minutes. At the forward position, the last sounds before silence, boots shifting in compacted snow, a radio being muted, someone coughing once and then not coughing again. The cold had a specific quality at this hour and altitude. It was not aggressive but absolute. The kind of cold that does not feel like attack but like the natural state of the universe, and warmth as the exception that requires explanation. Helen Dray lay in it without seeming to notice. Her breathing had slowed to a rate that Denton, the spotter, clocked at approximately 4 breaths per minute. Her hands were bare. She had removed her gloves 90 seconds ago, which struck everyone watching as insane, and then she had pressed her fingertips to the snow beside the rifle's stock, and then they had stopped asking questions about it. The wind spoke in its patterns. The snow moved in the way snow moves when something is about to happen, she said, without moving. Now he's standing at the window. Through the thermal optic on the spotter scope, Denton looked. The northeast window of Station Whitmore, 4,231 meters away, was a pale rectangle in the dark, and in it, a shape, vertical, still for the first time in 3 hours. Denton's hands were shaking slightly. She noted this with irritation and controlled it. Confirmed, she said. Helen Dray said nothing. She was somewhere beyond language now, in the space between intention and act where all the calculations were done and the only thing remaining was the physical moment of release. Her eyes were open. Her body was motionless. The rifle was the same temperature as the snow around it. She breathed in. She breathed out. She waited. Waiting was the skill that no system had ever successfully taught and that all systems had tried to replicate and failed. You could teach a shooter to calculate. You could not teach them to know when the calculation was finished. She knew. The cross phase came. The wind paused in its argument. Her finger moved. It is difficult, afterward, to reconstruct the sequence clearly. The people who were present described it differently. Some said the shot was so quiet in the storm that they almost missed it. Some said it was the loudest thing they had ever heard. The contradiction is not surprising. What they were actually describing was attention, not sound. They had been so focused, for so long, on the window, and the target, and the probability of failure that their senses were already past their normal calibration. What is agreed upon? The rifle fired. The muzzle suppressor reduced the report to something between a cough and a crack. The snow around the muzzle lifted in a brief, precise cloud and resettled. The tracer element on the round standard for confirmation in long-range work was visible as a faint line in the dark, traveling on a curve that bent slightly right and then corrected, moving in the way that only projectiles moving very far through imperfect air actually move, a path that looked wrong from the shooter's position and was, by every reasonable calculation, impossible to have calculated correctly. Denton had her eye to the spotter scope. She counted. At long range, you count. The round takes time. The distance demands patience. At 4.2 kilometers, a supersonic projectile traveling at approximately 850 meters per second requires approximately 5 seconds. 5 seconds is a long time when you are waiting for something you know will either work or not. 5 seconds contains entire futures. She counted to 4. She was still counting when the northeast window of Station Whitmore, 4,231 meters away in the dark and the storm, ceased to exist. The glass went first, a pale star fracture that spread in a millisecond, then was gone, replaced by an opening where the window had been. The figure in the window moved backward and did not come back. On the command post tablet, where Braxton's broadcast was still running, the feed stopped. The radio was silent for a full 3 seconds. Then, 9 voices at once, all cut off by Dunn's single word, quiet, and in the quiet, from the forward position, Hargrove's voice, barely above a whisper. She made it, sir. She made. I see it, Dunn said. Henner was looking at the woman lying in the snow. She had not moved. Her face was still angled at the distant station. Her hands were still bare against the snow. She was not celebrating. She was looking at something. Not at Whitmore. Slightly to the left, slightly higher. At the ridgeline on the opposite side of the valley. There's someone else out there, she said. The mission had been designed to be watched. This was what she told Dunn when he reached the forward position, moving fast through the snow with Kowalski 2 steps behind him. She told him standing up, not looking at him, her eyes on the opposite ridgeline with the focused stillness of a woman who has already processed the geometry of a threat and is currently deciding what to do about it. Braxton was the bait, she said. The irregular movement pattern, the position in a window, the live broadcast, all of it was designed to draw out the response. 19 attempts in 3 hours means 19 muzzle signatures, 19 positions, 19 thermal plumes. Someone was cataloging them. Someone on that ridge has spent the last 3 hours learning everything there is to know about this unit's capability and deployment. Dunn said, Braxton was the objective. Braxton was expendable. He knew it or he didn't. Doesn't matter now. She paused. The man on that ridge is the objective, and he's been waiting for me specifically. The silence that followed had a different quality than the tactical silence before the shot. It was heavier. Kowalski, who had been in the army for 32 years, recognized it as the silence that preceded the kind of conversation that doesn't happen in briefings. You know who it is, he said. She was quiet for 4 seconds. His name is Walter Greer, she said. We trained together. We operated together for 6 years. He was for several of those years the better shooter. She said this without apparent difficulty. As a fact, he disappeared after Operation Cold Watch. That was 9 years ago. We listed him as killed in action, but he wasn't, Dunn said. No. And now he's on that ridge. Yes. Why? She turned and looked at Dunn then. For the first time since the shot, her eyes had the quality of something that had been very cold for a very long time. Because I left him there, she said. In Cold Watch, in the field, under orders that required me to complete the extraction and abort the rescue. She held his gaze. I made the calculation. If I went back, the entire operation was compromised, and 62 personnel were at risk. If I didn't, one was at risk. She looked away. I didn't go back. The snow moved around them. On the opposite ridge, invisible in the storm, a man who had survived something unsurvivable and spent 9 years building a reason to have survived. It was watching through the same quality of optics she was, and waiting for the same quality of patience she had. He wanted you here, Kowalski said. He knew you'd come if the situation was significant enough. Yes. He staged all of this to get you to this position. Yes. A red dot appeared on Helen Dray's chest. She moved. The shot went through the space her center mass had occupied 0.2 of a second earlier. At this range, approximately 800 meters, not 4,000, a detail that clarified Greer's tactical intention immediately. It was not a miss caused by the same atmospheric chaos that had defeated the unit's shooters earlier. It was a miss caused by the fact that she was no longer there. She was behind a boulder that had been invisible in the snow. And she was there because she had expected exactly this, had read his timing in the way the laser dot moved, not the hesitation of a shooter setting up, but the deliberate pause of one who wants to be seen before he fires, who wants a moment of recognition, and had used the recognition to move. The rock above her head absorbed the shot with a sound like a hammer on iron. Around her, the tactical situation collapsed into controlled chaos. The unit's personnel were moving to cover positions. Dunn was on the radio calling for flanking assets that would take 20 minutes to arrive. Henner had his rifle up and was scanning the ridge, finding nothing, because Greer had already moved. The storm was his territory. He had chosen it. He had trained in it. So had she. Clear the frequency, she said into the radio. All of you off this channel. He's listening. Dre. He knows your call signs, your frequencies, your deployment patterns. He's been studying you for 3 hours. If you move on his position, he will know before you're there. She paused. This is between me and him. Move everyone back to the command post. I mean everyone. I'm not withdrawing my personnel because he won't fire at them, she said. He has no interest in them. If they stay, they're targets by proximity. If they go, they're safe. Another pause. He wants me. Only me. Give him what he wants, Colonel, and your people stay alive. There was a silence on the radio that lasted exactly as long as it took Dunn to realize she was right. Hargrove, Dunn said. You stay as comms relay. 50 meters back, behind the vehicle. Everyone else, fall back to the command post. Helen Dray did not hear the confirmation. She was already moving. The geography of the valley between her position and the opposite ridge was something she had mapped from the truck, from sound and the angles of windbreak and the way the terrain shaped the storm's movement. She did not have a visual map. She had a pressure map, a sense of where the high ground was, where the lee sides were, where a person moving quickly and quietly could move without being silhouetted. Greer had the same map. They had trained from the same curriculum. The difference was 9 years. His 9 years had been spent surviving, rebuilding, and hating with the specific clarity that only a person who has processed their hatred completely and made peace with it can manage. It was not hot, it was architectural. Her 9 years had been spent living with the choice she had made, in the particular ongoing desolation of a person who made the correct decision and cannot forgive themselves for it anyway. She was hit at 0031, not severely, a graze across the left shoulder, the round fragmenting on a rock to her right and sending a piece of metal across the top of her deltoid muscle, with just enough energy to tear through the jacket and open a shallow cut 4 centimeters long. She felt the impact as a shock, and then heat, and then the particular tight ache of a wound that is not critical but is real. She kept moving. Behind her, she heard Hargrove's voice, very faint on the radio, asking if she was okay. She did not respond. She pressed 2 fingers to the cut briefly, assessed it, moved her arm through its range of motion, and continued. On the ridge above, she knew, Greer had also heard the impact. He would know she was hit. He would know it was superficial. He had made that shot deliberately superficial. She was sure of it. He was not trying to end this from distance. He was trying to close it. He wanted to talk. She stopped behind a granite shelf and listened. Through the storm, wind, ice crystals against stone, the distant sound of the command post vehicles. And then so faint it was almost subliminal, the soft compression sound of a boot on packed snow, approximately 200 meters east-southeast. He was coming down. He found her by the frozen creek bed at the valley's center, or she allowed herself to be found there, which may have been the same thing. He was larger than she remembered. 9 years of survival had added density to a frame that had already been capable. He wore white over white field clothing with no insignia, no rank, nothing that connected him to any organization, because he belonged to none. His rifle was slung. Her rifle was in her hand, muzzle down. They stood 8 meters apart in the storm and looked at each other. His face was familiar in the way that a language you haven't spoken for years is familiar. The structure was there, but the texture had changed. "You made the shot," he said. His voice was flat with something that was not quite admiration and not quite contempt. "I wasn't sure you'd still be able to." "You were sure," she said. "That's why you arranged for this." He was quiet. "You needed it to be something I couldn't ignore," she said. "A hostage situation, a tactical impossibility. You knew I'd hear about it. You knew I'd come." She paused. "You needed me to make the shot so that I'd be here, in range, ready to be reminded of what I can do, what we both can do." She looked at him. "You've been angry for 9 years, Walter. You had time to plan this. I'm just trying to understand what you wanted from it." "I wanted you to know I survived," he said. "I know. I wanted you to know it cost me everything. I know that too." The snow moved between them. The storm had reached some kind of peak. The wind was nearly constant now, the visibility down to perhaps 30 meters, the cold beyond temperature into something that was simply the state of existing outside. "The order came from Brentfield," she said. "Not from me. I passed it on. I made the call to execute it. But the order, I know where the order came from." "Then you know I wasn't." "I know exactly what happened," he said, and his voice was very quiet now, the flatness replaced by something that had more texture. "I have had 9 years to reconstruct it. I have found and spoken to 11 people who were in that chain of command. I know what Brentfield decided and why, and I know what your orders were, and I know what you did with them." He looked at her. "I know you had no good choice." Helen Dray said nothing. "That's not the point," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not. The point is that I lay in that valley for 14 hours with a compound fracture and 2 bullet wounds, and I counted on you coming back. For 14 hours I was completely certain that you were coming back." His voice did not break. It had already broken, years ago, and healed in a different configuration. That certainty kept me alive. The certainty was wrong, but it kept me alive. And then I got out on my own, a civilian family. I was there for 3 months. I won't tell you what that cost them." He paused. "But I got out, and I spent a year deciding what to do with having gotten out." She waited. "I decided I wasn't finished," he said, "with any of it, Walter. Including this," he said, "including you." The laser dot appeared on her sternum. Not from his rifle, he had not raised it, from a secondary position. She had not mapped a secondary position. She had not thought he would have one. She had been wrong. "I planned this very carefully," he said. "I've been planning it for 3 years. Every component." He looked at her with the expression of someone who has waited very long for a moment and is now finding that the moment is not what they had imagined. "I wanted you here. I wanted you to know what I know. I wanted you to understand that I survived and that surviving cost more than dying would have." "And then?" she said again. He was silent for a long time. The storm moved through the space between them, the cold pressed down. "I don't know," he said, and it was the first thing he had said that was completely unplanned. She heard it, the break in the architecture. The place where 9 years of preparation met the actual moment and found that the actual moment was different from every imagined version of it. "Put the secondary position down," she said. Not a command, not a request. Something else, the voice of someone who has been in the same darkness and knows its specific geography. "Helen, we have both been dead since Cold Watch," she said. "You know that. You said it first. Years ago you told me once that the people who survive the unsurvivable aren't really survivors, they're the aftermath." She paused. "I've been living in aftermath for 9 years, Walter. So have you. Neither of us came back from that valley. We just kept moving." The laser dot remained. The wind had no opinion. "There are 41 people at that station," she said. "Alive because of something that happened tonight. That's not nothing. That doesn't undo Cold Watch. It doesn't undo any of it. She looked at him directly. But it's not nothing. Walter Greer stood in the storm for a very long time. Then he said, into a radio she couldn't hear, "Stand down." The laser dot disappeared. He raised his own weapon. What happened next was disputed afterward by the two people present and the one person who heard it on the radio relay. Hargrove, positioned behind the armored vehicle 200 meters north, heard two shots fired within approximately 200 milliseconds of each other. He could not determine which came first. He reported this to Dunn, who reported it to the debrief team, who found the information inconclusive. What Hargrove did not hear was the conversation that preceded it, because the radio was positioned to pick up ambient sound, and the wind had increased enough in those final minutes to carry most of it away. He heard fragments. He heard Helen Dray say something that included the words the same, though he could not reconstruct the context. He heard Greer say something he could not make out at all. He heard a silence that lasted approximately 90 seconds. Then the two shots. Then nothing. The rescue elements reached the creek bed at 0051. They found the following: two brass casings in the snow, 6 meters apart. Blood, two separate traces, from two separate directions, converging toward the same point and then separating. One set of tracks leading east into the storm, growing faint within 20 meters and vanishing entirely within 40. One set of tracks leading nowhere, terminating at a boulder, as if the person had simply stepped behind it and ceased to exist. Walter Greer was not found. Helen Dray was not found. The blood traces were collected and analyzed. The eastern trace contained sufficient volume to indicate a serious wound, not immediately fatal, but significant. The analysis was never formally released. At 0115, the quick reaction elements reached Station Whitmore through the main valley approach. All 41 hostages were alive. The official record of the operation, classified at the highest level, contains a summary entry that reads, "Long-range engagement executed by unidentified contractor. Target eliminated. Supporting personnel unknown. Investigation pending." Investigation pending. It had been pending for 4 years when Hargrove, by then a sergeant stationed in Germany, first told the story to a fellow soldier. He told it carefully. He left out several things he didn't know how to explain. The soldier he told it to told someone else. The story moved. It moved the way stories move when they have the quality of something true, not quickly, not loudly, but with persistence. It moved through the community of people who work in the spaces where official records stop, where the documentation ends and the reality continues without notation. It moved through people who understand that the longest shots are not measured in meters. What they said, in various versions: 41 people, 1 shot, conditions impossible. She walked into the storm and didn't come back. No, she came back. She's just what? Not here. Not anywhere official. Hargrove did not know which version was true. He had been at the forward position. He had heard 2 shots. He had found 2 brass casings and 2 blood trails in the snow. He did not know what had happened in the creek bed at the center of the valley between 2 people who had been trained by the same system and broken by the same operation and had spent 9 years becoming whatever they had become. He thought about it often. He thought about the way she had moved when the laser dot appeared, not panicked, not even urgent, just lateral, a precise small movement born from years of understanding that the space you occupy is always temporary. He thought about the way she had looked before the first shot, lying in the snow with bare hands pressed against the cold, reading something he could not read in the wind and the darkness. He thought about the thing she had said, the thing that had seemed strange at the time, and seemed stranger every year since. "I'm not trying to solve the problem. I'm trying to dissolve it." He had written it down. He still had the note. In the mountains of Alaska, the Kenai Glacier continued its slow progress. The valley where Station Whitmore had stood was decommissioned 2 years after the operation the facility deemed compromised. The site cleared, the prefabricated structures removed. In winter, the valley filled with snow and became featureless and white and very quiet. In that quiet, if you knew where to stand, you could find a boulder at the center of a frozen creek bed. Behind it, if the snow was shallow, you might find a small depression in the earth where a person had knelt for a very long time. The depression was unremarkable. It looked like the kind of impression a large animal makes when it rests. No official record connected Helen Dray's name to any operation after 2014. Her service file listed her as separated under medical grounds. Her whereabouts were listed as unknown. The shot she fired 4,231 meters, in conditions that every ballistic calculation said were impossible, using equipment that had no business making the round at all, was never entered into any record. No record could contain it. You cannot contain something in a record when the person who did it does not exist in any record. The people who were there knew. They knew in the particular way that people know things that they cannot prove and will not be believed about, completely and quietly and always. Henner, the sniper with 17 confirmed kills and a reputation, went back to his unit and spent several months being unusually quiet. When a junior member of his team asked him once about the best shot he had ever seen, he said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I saw someone read the wind." "What does that mean?" He shook his head. "It means there are people who calculate, and people who know. And if you're very lucky, once in your life, you'll see the difference." He paused. "I don't recommend it. It makes everything else feel small." Hargrove was in his barracks in Germany, years later, unable to sleep the way he was sometimes unable to sleep since that winter, when he wrote the thing he had been trying to write for a long time. He was not a writer. He was a soldier who had seen something. "There is a difference, and also there is not." He wrote, she said, "The target will move to that window in 7 minutes." And he did, she said. "The wind will open in 22 seconds, and it did," she said. "There's someone else out there." And there was. Every impossible thing she said turned out to be true. Not because she was magical, because she had paid attention for so long and at such cost that the world had stopped hiding things from her. I don't know if she's alive. I don't know what happened in that valley between her and the man who had waited 9 years to confront her. I know 2 shots were fired. I know 2 people walked in and neither of them walked out in a direction I could follow. I know that 41 people are alive. I know there's a brass casing in my desk drawer that I picked up from the forward position that night. I keep it because I don't know what else to do with it. It's small and heavy and cold and it tells me nothing. But it's the only proof I have that the night happened the way I remember it. There are legends that need to be believed to survive. This is not one of them. This one survived everything else first. In the forward position logs, a single entry was made by Corporal Dennis Hargrove at 2,249 hours, the night of the operation. It reads, "Unidentified female, contractor status, executed long-range engagement at estimated 4,231 meters. Single round, single effect. Wind conditions variable. No electronics utilized. Outcome, confirmed. Contractor departed scene before extraction. Identity, Helen Dray. Status, unknown." Below it, in different handwriting whose Hargrove never determined someone had added a single word,